The video tells why 40 million older Americans are returning empty-handed. And the data actually shows how bad things can get. If you are between 45 and 65, the next 20 minutes may be the most important financial reality check you get this month. In the Walmart parking lot outside Phoenix, Arizona, on Tuesday morning, a 71-year-old woman named Linda finished her night shift on a sock rack, walked to her 2009 Honda Civic and slept in the driver's seat. That car is where she lives now. After 38 years of work, raising 2 children, and paying for Social Security with each paycheck, Linda's total monthly income dropped to about $2,000 on a Social Security check that disappeared as soon as she got it. Rent ran out, insulin ran out, gasoline, groceries ran out, the rest ran out. Linda is not an outlier. She is one of more than 40 million older Americans facing the same brutal arithmetic. Not enough savings, no pensions, no realistic exit ramp. This is not an apocalyptic video. It is a wake-up call with receipts. Follow me. Chapter 1. Numbers nobody wants to talk about. Let me give you a headline number that should be on the front page of every newspaper in the United States. But somehow it is not. The population of Americans ages 60 to 69 has more than doubled in just 2 decades. According to research by the Schwartz Center for Economic Policy Analysis, a new school led by the economist Teresa Gilarducci, at the beginning of the 21st century, the size of this group was about 20 million, climbing to 29.5 million in 2010 and 40.8 million in 2024, becoming the largest wave of retirees in American history. That is what makes people uncomfortable. According to the 2024 estimate of the U.S. Census Bureau, the total population aged 65 and over is 61.2 million, accounting for about 1/5 of the U.S. population, while 11 states currently have more elderly people than children. The same situation in nearly half of the counties in the United States. Demographically, this is the oldest country we've ever had. None of this is a crisis in itself, because many countries are aging gracefully. When you ask a simple question, the crisis begins. How many of these 40 million aging Americans are really able to stop working? The Financial Security Trends survey released by the American Association of Retirees in April 2024 shows that the answer is shocking. 1 in 5 adults, 50 and older have retirement savings, which is not low savings or lagging savings or anything, not a dime or a dollar. 61% admitted that they feared they would not have enough money to support themselves if they stopped working. And the bottom line that really stalled you was that more than a quarter of Americans 50 and older who had not yet retired said they expected never to retire. Don't be late, never. Indira Venkateswaran, research director at ARP, put it this way, and I quote him directly: "Every adult in the United States should retire with dignity and financial security. However, too many people lack retirement savings options. Some older Americans say they never thought of retiring. It is a polite institutional version. Simply put, they work until they die." Chapter 2. How did we get here? Pension theft. To understand why 40 million Americans returned empty-handed, you have to understand the quiet revolutions of 1978 to 2000 and the revolutions that most people experienced without realizing what they were deprived of. Here is the story. Back in 1980, if you worked for a private company in the United States, chances are you actually had a pension, not a 401, but a real fixed income pension. You invested it for 30 years, and your former employer wrote you a check every month for the rest of your life, which is predictable, guaranteed and supported by federal law. In 1980, 38% of private sector workers held fixed income pensions, compared with 19% holding 401 pensions, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, compiled by Investopedia. By 2015, those numbers had completely flipped. Pensions were almost extinct, and 401 plans were playing out. How did this happen? In 1978, Congress passed the Income Act, which contained a little-known small provision called Section 401. The provision was originally designed as a tax haven for well-paid executives who wanted to defer some of their bonuses to retirement accounts, which were never intended to replace pensions. But here is the problem. American companies recognize something powerful at first glance. This happens when employees move from defined benefit pensions, a decades-old financial obligation that companies must fund each year, to defined contribution plans. In a fixed-income pension plan, employees finance retirement and assume all investment risks, thus transferring the full burden of retirement from the company's balance sheet. Even Ted Benner, widely seen as the father of 401, has publicly acknowledged that too many Americans are disappointed with the status quo of the system because he uses it as a supplement, not a substitute. Here are the data points that really drive this view. Also from the Schwartz Center's analysis of health and retirement studies. In 1992, fixed income pensions accounted for more than 50% of the retirement wealth of households aged 51 to 56, meaning pensions are the foundation, but by 2022, the proportion had plummeted to 25%. Today, most of America's retirement wealth is in 401 S&E RA accounts, which fluctuate with the stock market. In these accounts, if you retire for the wrong year, you may evaporate 30% of your savings overnight. Did ordinary American workers get a vote in this transition? In 1985, no one asked you to sit down and explain that the lifetime guaranteed products you promised were about to be replaced by a self-financing brokerage account, all renamed Progress. So it happened quietly, more than 30 years later, and now 40 million baby boomers are retiring with unimaginable consequences. Chapter 3, Peak 65, Springtide Unprepared. If you never heard of the word Peak 65, remember, because this is a demographic moment that has never happened in American history. A January 2024 white paper by the Alliance for Life Income, written by the economist Jason Fichtner, announced that the US had entered what they called the Peak 65 zone in 2024. In short, what that means, over the next 3 years, by 2027, more than 4.1 million Americans will be 65 or older annually, equivalent to about 11,200 a day. reaching the traditional retirement age. That number has been around 10,000 a day for the last decade. So we're just accelerating, and we're staying there for years. The question is whether 4.1 million people a year are financially ready to stop working. And the answer, according to a study by the Retirement Income Institute, reported by CBS News, is no, not even close. 53% of the so-called baby boomers have total assets of less than $250,000. Let me repeat that number because it is worth logging in. More than half of retired Americans now have $250,000 or less to easily fund 20 to 30 years of retirement. And things will get worse. The Alliance for Life Income has set peak 65's median retirement savings at $225,000, while Natix's investment managers have taken a different approach to setting baby boomers' median retirement savings at $120,000. Take the higher figure of $225,000, and by applying the standard 4% withdrawal rule, advocated by financial planners for decades, you end up making $9,000 a year, or $750 a month, from your savings. Combined with the average Social Security check, the monthly Social Security check, as of January 2026, amounted to about $2,071, and the total monthly income before tax, Medicare premiums, and a pharmacy visit was about $2,800, according to the Social Security Bureau report. In most subway areas in China, the median rent for a one-bedroom apartment is well over $1,500. Car insurance is climbing. Groceries are climbing. Every utility company is climbing. And retirement of $2,800 a month is uncomfortable. It bought a stressful one. Nearly half of 65-year-olds in the United States do not believe their savings will last a lifetime. And 31% worry about running out of money within 5 years of retirement, according to LIMRA. 5 years later. 40. Chapter 4. Social Security Time Bomb. Some of you are thinking, well, the savings prospects are bad, but Social Security still exists. That is the safety net. That is the bottom line. I want to be very careful and very honest with you here, because there is a lot of misinformation on both sides. Here are the facts from direct sources. The 2024 Social Security Trustee Report, the official annual report issued by the Plan's Trustee Committee, predicts that the Pension and Survivors Insurance Trust that pays your retirement benefits will run out in 2033. An updated version of the Trustee's 2025 report, released in June 2025, advanced the consolidated depletion date of OASD to 2034, a year earlier than previous projections. What exactly does exhaustion mean? This part of the information is constantly misinformed, so pay attention. That doesn't mean Social Security is gone or checks are stopped. Social Security is financed largely by the continuing payroll tax, or FICA's quota on your wage stubs, which flows in as long as people continue to work. The real meaning is that once the trust's reserves are exhausted, Social Security can only legally pay the funds it collects in real time, which means an immediate, automatic and comprehensive 21% reduction in all retirement benefits. According to the 2024 Trustee Report, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, a non-partisan watchdog, calculates that a 21% cut would mean about $18,400 a year in benefits for a typical two-worker couple who retire before and after an exhaustion day. $18,000. Gone. Every year, every couple. For older people already living, Social Security alone is fine. According to the National Institute on Retirement Security, about 40% of older Americans depend entirely or almost entirely on Social Security for retirement income, and 21% of the cuts are not inconvenience but disaster. I want to be fair here. Andrew Biggs of the American Enterprise Institute questioned the 40% figure, saying census data underestimated 401 and IRA withdrawals, and that the true figure of total reliance on Social Security was close to 10 to 12%. Even at low numbers, you're still talking about tens of millions of Americans for whom Social Security is the only gap between them and poverty. The exact percentage is more important than the underlying reality that the program is burdening a large elderly population, and Congress has not taken any specific steps to address the funding gap. NPR reported on the 18th of June, 2025, that unless Congress acts, benefits will face cuts within 8 years. 8 years later, about 7 years now. 7 years later, lawmakers told themselves that they had time and that every shot they could kick would make the final solution more painful, calling for further tax increases, further entitlement cuts, or both. Schroeder's 2024 U.S. Retirement Survey found that 51% of non-retired Americans said they were worried, or very worried, that Social Security would run out before they needed it, and 88% acknowledged that they were at least partly worried about how they would generate retirement income. Nearly 70% of Americans said they were more worried about running out of money than death itself, according to a widely cited survey by Allianz Life in 2024 at multiple stores. Read it again. Americans now fear poverty and aging more than death, which tells you everything you need to know about the psychological burden of this crisis. Chapter 5. Not tired in the face of crisis, homelessness, medical debt. Numbers are useful, but they don't show up in Walmart's parking lot at 5 a.m. people do. Let me tell you what this crisis looks like on the streets. Start with homelessness. The Department of Housing and Urban Development released its 2024 homeless assessment with startling results. On one night in 2024, about 770,000 people in the United States were homeless, up 18% from 2023, a record high. Here is what headlines mostly miss. According to the Bipartisan Policy Center's analysis of time point statistics for 2024, the fastest growing population is not the young, but the elderly, with more than 104,000 people aged 55 to 64 counted as homeless. Forbes reported in January 2025 that families with children and people 55 and older were the two groups hardest hit, the fastest growing segment of the nation's homeless population, now 5 to 10 years from receiving Social Security benefits, could have been housed in paid housing instead of sleeping in shelters or cars a generation ago. turn to healthcare debt. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation, more than 1/5 of us adults 65 and older had medical or dental debt in 2022, and the National Council on Aging reported that by 2020, older Americans had nearly $54 billion in unpaid medical bills, up 20% in just 1 year. Crucially, these people already have Medicare. Medicare doesn't cover everything. It doesn't cover most teeth. It doesn't cover hearing aids well. It doesn't cover long-term care, which can cost $8,000 to $10,000 a month at a care facility. Another survey found that 27% of Americans 65 and older saved less than $500 to pay for health care. For less than $500, they were on an underwater air tour. Now, for the current explosion, not tired. UP released a follow-up survey in February 2026, and the results should make national headlines. In the first 6 months alone, 7% of American retirees re-entered the labor market, up from 6% the previous summer, and the trend is accelerating. When UP asked why, 48% said the answer came down to one thing: they needed more income. In a December 2025 analysis of 80-year-olds in Business Insider, CBS News interviewed retirees and said, I quote one directly, "You have to eat." Nearly 20% of Americans of traditional retirement age are now either working or actively looking for work. That is what economists used to call retirement. And we really need a new word to describe it all. Teresa Ghilarducci, the new university economist I mentioned earlier, spoke publicly about visiting Walmart and Costco's and seeing 90-year-olds pushing shopping carts in the heat, looking for a second or third retirement job. The arguments she relayed in the interview made me think we had built a country where the safety net for the elderly caught the rich and dragged everyone else down. And the data supported her. Chapter 6. Inequality hidden in averages. Every time you see a headline saying, Americans have an average of $500,000 in retirement savings, you roll your eyes and keep rolling your eyes. Because the average in this country is very, very misleading. Here is why. The Investment Company Institute reported that as of the 31st of December 2025, the total retirement assets of the United States were $49.1 trillion. $49 trillion, a lot of money. However, the piles are unevenly distributed or even tight. According to the Federal Reserve's Consumer Finance Survey in 2022, the latest comprehensive data we have show that the median retirement savings of households aged 55 to 64 are $185,000, $200,000 for households aged 65 to 74 and $130,000 for households aged 75 and over. This is the median, not the average, meaning half of households own properties below that level. Once you start dividing by race, things quickly get worse. By 2019, the average retirement balance for white workers had climbed to 116% of annual income, compared with 39% for Black and Hispanic workers. According to an analysis by the ERISA Advisory Committee of the U.S. Department of Labor, the Wharton University Pension Research Board reports that American adults have retirement accounts as follows. 54% of white adults have retirement accounts. 37% of black adults have retirement accounts. And 34% of Hispanic adults have retirement accounts. The American Association of Retirees reported in July 2023 that black workers aged 51 to 64 were the least likely racial or ethnic group to hold any retirement accounts in the United States. This is not the story of personal financial literacy. It is a story of decades of wage inequality, job discrimination, lack of access to workplace retirement plans, and family wealth never allowed to accumulate. All of this is now intensifying in real time, becoming a crisis of old age poverty that has hit some communities 10 times as hard as others. When it comes to access, the Our Public Policy Institute estimates that about 57 million American workers do not have access to retirement plans at work. Number 401. No simple era. Nothing. The numbers are clear. When employers offer work plans, Americans are 15 times more likely to actually save for retirement. So when you don't have a work plan, you have little opportunity to open a separate brokerage account, continue to fund it, and maintain 40 years of discipline. Only 9 states, including California, Colorado, Connecticut, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Oregon, and Virginia, as well as Massachusetts, which has multi-employer programs, currently run automated EIR programs for workers without employer programs, while about 2/3 of the states have not acted at all. 2 bills now before Congress, the American Retirement Savings Act and the Irish Republican Army Automatic Act of 2024, are likely to change that, with bipartisan support but no progress. Chapter 7. Official Poverty Data Cover-Up. It is a small statistical war with huge practical consequences that most people have never even heard of. In 2024, the official poverty rate for Americans 65 and older in the United States was 9.7%. The standard figure cited by the Census Bureau and cited in most policy debates. But the Census Bureau also released a second, more accurate measure, called the Supplemental Poverty Measure, that takes into account what the official measure ignores, including out-of-pocket healthcare costs, regional cost of living differences, taxes, and real housing costs. According to the SPM, the elderly poverty rate was 15% in 2024, up from 14% in 2022 and 2023. That is about 1 in 6 Americans, 65 and older, living in poverty. And once you consider how much they actually need to spend, the National Council on Aging has for the first time in years listed it as an important warning sign of measurable growth. Let it land for a while. 30 years after supposedly creating the world's largest retirement system, the number of older Americans living in poverty is rising, not falling. Chapter 8. What can you really do? I told you from the beginning that this is not an apocalyptic video. So let me summarize what really matters. No matter where you stand now, what you can do. If you are between 45 and 55 years old and your savings lag, the catch-up clause in the current tax code represents the least used tool in retirement plans. Once you turn 50, you can pay an additional $7,500 to your 401 account on top of the standard limit. And, since this year, Secure 2.0 has even expanded pensions between the ages of 60 and 63. Use it aggressively. If you retire between the ages of 55 and 65, calculate those numbers honestly. Skip the optimistic calculator on brokerage websites and use the Monte Carlo simulator, which can stress test your portfolio for bad market years in the years after you retire. Financial planners call it the return risk sequence, which represents the biggest threat to your money in the first 5 years of retirement. For every follower, delaying the Social Security age from 62 to 70, if possible, increases benefits by about 76% a month, making it the best single longevity insurance provided by the U.S. government. And most people don't use Social Security because they don't know. I can't overstate that last point. Talk to your representatives. The United States Retirement Savings Act and the Automatic ERA Act of 2024 are currently under discussion in Congress. Social Security needs a solution, and the longer people wait, the more painful the solution becomes. The CFB has made it clear that the cost of fixing the problem now is much lower than waiting until the trust reaches zero. The crisis was not built in a vacuum. This is a predictable result of 40 years of policy choices, many of them made when most of you are not paying attention. The good news is that policy can also eliminate the crisis, but only if voters need it. Closing. Linda, the woman in Walmart's parking lot, represents 40 million people, maybe more. But each of those 40 million people is a person who has worked, a person who has paid, a person who has been quietly walked back by the system for decades. If you see yourself in any of these numbers, zero savings, medical debt, not working hard, worrying about a steady flow of checks, there are 2 things to know. First of all, you're not alone. You have millions of neighbors in the same boat. And our culture's shame on the economic plight of older people is one of its cruelest lies. Second, this problem can be solved. Not easy, not cheap, not happy, but it can be solved. Because other countries have solved this problem, and so can we. If the video gives you something useful, the best thing you can do is share it with someone, siblings, colleagues, parents, and anyone who needs to listen. The information gap before and after retirement in this country is the single biggest reason this crisis has been quietly unfolding for so long. And we end our conversations only once at a time. I will continue to cover this story. So if you want to follow up, subscribe. Trustees report a decline every summer. ARP surveys every spring. And I break down each project in the same way: actual data, actual sources, no rotation. Thanks for watching. Be smart outside and take care of yourself.